Hello and welcome to my March wrap-up. I managed to read 9 books this month. Most of them were for the Goodreads challenge as I was behind on that. I will do a separate video for that. I'm going to try and do it next month so that I'm not posting similar content too close together. But for now, let's just discuss what I read last month. Starting off with the book that I read that was aimed at younger audiences, I read Frosty Fiesta by Alix Milway. This is the 4th book, or perhaps the 5th book, in the Hotel Flamingo series. This is a series about Anna, who inherits an animal hotel, and the little adventures that they get up to. In this book, it's winter, which means off-season for the hotel. However, their rooms start filling up with guests that are taking part in the Winter Whiteout Games. This whole series has been fun. This book was no exception, and there's not really much else to say about that. Next I read Shadow of the Gods by Gwynne. This is the first book in the Bloodsworn saga, which is a Norse-inspired fantasy series. It is set after the gods have warred and pretty much wiped themselves out. I think there's only one god still alive, and they're locked away. However, their bones can be found across the lands, and they hold immense power. Their descendants are also walking the world. They are known as the Tainted, and they tend to be shunned by society. Many of them are kept as slaves, and they're just treated poorly. But they do have special abilities that are inherited from their godly parents, and quite often their abilities are exploited by the people around them. We follow 3 point of views. So the first one is Orca. She's a skilled warrior who is trying to put her past behind her and live a quiet life with her husband and child. When her family's attacked and her child taken, so she must go after him to try and rescue him. The second point of view was my favourite, and that was Varg. He was a slave, but after the murder of his sister, he escapes. He really wants to find out what happened to her, but somehow finds himself joining the Bloodsworn. These are a band of mercenaries. Then the final point of view is Elva. She is part of another mercenary band. This is the Battlegrim, and I didn't like the Battlegrim as much as I did the Bloodsworn. I'm going to guess the Bloodsworn are more important to the story, seeing as it's called the Bloodsworn Saga. So it was an okay start to the series, but I was a little disappointed. Last year I read both The Faithful and the Fallen, and Blood and Bone, which is John Gwynne's other series, and most books I rated either a high 4-star or a 5-star. This one I only rated 3 stars, so I don't know whether it's because it is a 3-star, or whether I felt it was a 3-star because I was comparing it to books later on in the previous series. As in the first book in the series, you always have the world building. You've not yet got to know the characters, so you're not as connected to them. And it could have been that caused me to rate this lower, comparing it to books where that world building and character connection have already been created. Or it could be that I'm not going to enjoy this series as much. I did feel that with the 3 points of view, there was only one that I really cared about. That was Varg. I thought his story was interesting. He was an interesting character. I found by the end of the book that I cared about what happened to him. And I also really liked the characters around him as well. Whereas with Orca, although I was interested in her story, I wasn't as interested in her as a character. And with Elva, I didn't care about her. I didn't care about her story. I didn't care about the characters around her. Mostly anyway. I was interested in how she interacted with a couple of characters. They were characters who were tainted. And her particular mercenary band, one of the things they did is hunt down the tainted and sell them. So they're basically slave traders. I don't think the Bloodsworn do that. I'm not 100% sure on that. The setting of the book was interesting, because when they said Norse-inspired, I was expecting them to use the gods from Norse mythology, but instead, John Gwynne's created his own gods. They are quite similar to the Norse gods. You can see the links between them. I'm not that knowledgeable of Norse mythology, and I was able to see some of the links between the gods and the mythology in this, and the gods and mythology in Norse mythology. And I quite liked seeing those links. I did find, however, that when I got to the end of the book, I wasn't really sure what the overreaching plot was. I'm not sure where the second and third book are going to go. I have some idea, but I'm not able to make many predictions. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think it's a good thing either. but I should be reading the second book next month. It's currently April, so that should be May, so I should then have a better idea about what's going on. I then read The Wager by David Grann. This is a non-fiction about the Wager, which is a ship that went missing in the 1740s during the War of Jenkins' Ear. This is a war between Spain and Great Britain. It was mostly fought around trade, and I think it included warfare both on land and at sea as well. So the Wager went missing, and 2 different groups of survivors appeared quite a while afterwards. They both had different stories about what happened, and this book basically looks at both stories and looks at the evidence around what happened, because there was fairly good records kept. There were, however, biased records, and although some records were kept during the time they were missing, some of them were also written retrospectively. So of course they're biased, and some of them are relying on memory, which is of course very fallible. So it's not really certain what the truth actually is. So the book pretty much tells us about what happened from before the ship sets off until after the court case that is held about the sinking of the ship. At the beginning of the book, David Grann states that he includes both stories and is leaving it up to us to decide what we think happened, as he himself doesn't know, and it's not really been established what the truth actually is. However, it seemed to me that through most of the book, only one narrative was being told to us. There were different perspectives about what happened, and we were told the story from different people, but it was still pretty much the same story that was being told, and it was only once it talked about when everyone returned home that the stories then divulged, and that felt to me like it was pushing us towards believing a particular story. However, that could just be me misreading it. Other than that though, I thought it was a well-written book. It was accessible. There were times when it read more like fiction than non-fiction. I don't really have a problem with that, as I find that quite often non-fiction is dry, and when it reads more like a fiction, it becomes less dry. Though of course, there's a chance that reading more like fiction will make it seem less believable. For me, that's not the case, but it could be the case for other people, I'm not sure. It was an interesting subject, especially as it's about an experience that I am highly unlikely to ever have. That makes it hard for me to know what I would do in that situation. Die most likely, but what I'd do leading up to my death, I don't know. I would be interested to read more about the Wager in the future. I want to read the book by John Byron about what happened. I think he is the father of the Lord Byron that we know, who's mad, bad and dangerous to know, although I did actually find out that not everyone has heard that and not everyone knows who Lord Byron is, so what I thought was common knowledge might not actually be common knowledge, but I believe John Byron is his dad, and I think John Byron's experiences with the Wager actually inspired some of Lord Byron's writing. I can't actually remember what Lord Byron's name is. Both of them were Lord Byron, but the writer Lord Byron, what his name was, I'm not sure. I think I'd also like to read more by this author as well. I have read The Lost City of Zed. That was also interesting. I think I liked that a bit more than this one, but it's been a while since I read it, so I can't actually remember. Then I read Starling House by Alix Harrow. This book was better than I expected, and I rated it 4 stars. It's about Opal, who lives in a rundown town with her younger brother. She's trying to make more money so she can pay for her brother's tuition fees and send him out of the town, as she wants to make a better life for him. Her mother died a few years ago, and she never knew her father, so it's pretty much just her and her brother. There are other people out there who care for her, and as a reader, I could see that they cared for her, but Opal couldn't see that they cared for her. She then gets a job at Starling House, which is basically the haunted house of the town. There's lots of rumours surrounding this house and its current owner, and the house does have a strange history. But the money's good, and Opal finds that she's drawn to the house, and as she works there, she tries to unravel the mystery behind it as well. Part of her wants to know more, part of her wants to stay away, but the house just keeps drawing her back. Opal was an interesting character. She definitely made her life more difficult. For so long it had just been her and her brother, and before then, even when her mum was around, they struggled. This has caused her to become really independent, and this means that she doesn't seek out help, but it also means that she rejects help when it's given to her. We could see that she was basically screwing herself over on multiple occasions, but because we could also see snippets from her past, we could understand why she behaved this way. And as I started to get to know the character more, I started to really wish that she would help herself and that she would allow other people to help her as well, as she was definitely a character that I cared about what happened to her. I didn't care as much about the guy who lived at Starling House. I found that I wasn't interested in his character as much. I was interested in her relationship with her brother. It was especially interesting when we got to see things more from his point of view, because of the differences between that and the assumptions that she had made about him. It was basically a case that they needed to communicate more than they were doing, and that she also needed to accept that he had autonomy and could make his own decisions, and that she didn't have to look after him all the time. So this was an atmospheric gothic book, and it reminded me quite a bit of fairy tales. It was the first book I've read by this author. There's been so many times that I've seen her books and been interested in them, but this is the first one that I've actually read, and I hope to read more from her in the future. After that, I read Where the Wildflowers Grow by Terah, Shelton, Harris. This is the first time that I've read something that's considered as healing fiction, and I've got mixed opinions about it. So it's about Lee, who's the only survivor of the crash of a prison transport that she's on. She sees this as an opportunity to escape and to start afresh. But then the greyhound bus she's on, that breaks down and she finds herself stranded in a small town. She then takes a job at a flower farm where the people who work there have their own histories that they're trying to work through. As the story progresses, we get to know more about Lee's past, and as she starts to find a place where she belongs, she starts to heal from that past and the trauma related to it, as well as finding love. So it's a really sweet, beautifully written book. There's so many quotable lines in there, and I love the different characters, and I enjoyed the exploration of trauma and overcoming trauma and grief. However, there were times when the story seemed too twee for me. The story progression and the characters, they seemed too perfect, and it was just a little sickly sweet in places. Now, I do believe that fiction can help people heal from trauma, so I'd be interested to know whether this book has helped people in that way. Well, it's not something that I can speak for. For me, it was an okay book, but I'm not sure whether I was actually the right audience for it. I then read my first 5-star of the year, which was The Second Death of Locke by V.L. Bovalino. This is set in a country that's at war. We follow Gray, who is a well, and that means she has magical abilities, but she can't use the magic. She's paired with Kia, who is a mage, and a mage is someone who doesn't have magic, but can use the magic of a well. So often these mages and wells are paired together, and as well as providing the magic, the well's job is also to protect the mage. Magic in this land, however, has become weaker since the Isle of Locke has disappeared. And since its disappearance, no new wells have been born either. At the beginning of this book, Kia and Gray are sent to retrieve a resource from the enemy. This kickstarts a whole chain of events that will have a long-lasting effect on the war, the people, and the lands. It's a romantic fantasy, and although it's the first of a series, it can also be read as a standalone, as the books in the series are more interconnected standalones that are just set in this world. I found that the writing was really absorbing, and I really liked the characters and the plot. The plot was quite predictable, but its execution kept me interested and wanting to read more. When I got to the end of the book, I felt slightly disappointed, not because of anything negative to do with the book, but because I wanted to read more. I wanted to know more about what happened to the characters. But at the same time, I was satisfied that their story was rounded up. I look forward to the publication of the next book. I am a little wary though, because it's following different characters. If I don't like those characters as much, I probably won't enjoy the book as much, and it could be a disappointment. But there's always a chance that it's better as well. I then read Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This book has been on my TBR for years, and I finally got round to it. It is about Eleanor, who believes that her life is completely fine. If by fine you mean you have no friends, you have poor social skills, and you spend your weekend in a semi-drunk haze in order to push away your emotions and to not think about the past. She then starts to form friendships after her and a colleague help a man who's collapsed in the street. This leads to her starting to see the problems that she has in life and starts the process of her facing these problems and learning how to overcome them. Initially, I gave this book 5 stars, but then I lowered my rating to a high 4 stars, just because there were a few things that I weren't too sure on and that I didn't quite like. So I have done a reading vlog for this book, which contains spoilers. I've not yet edited that, so it's not posted. But when I do, I'll come back and put the link in the top corner of the screen. I think it's that corner and not that corner. I got it wrong last time. So if it's not there, then either it's not up yet or I've forgotten to do so. But that will go in a bit more detail about my thoughts around the book. But overall, I enjoyed it. It was really funny in places, especially towards the beginning. But then it started to become really sad as Eleanor started to face her problems. But it did end on a positive note. I felt it did a good job for creating empathy for Eleanor. And as there are people like Eleanor out there in the world, I hope it also helps create empathy for people like her as well, as I think people like that often get shunned by society because they're not normal and they don't know quite how to interact normally with people. And that can lead to people treating them differently, often people treating them negatively as well. So hopefully this is the sort of book that can help with that. And on the other side, I hope people like Eleanor who read this book can also get something from it as well. The book showed how important it is to have a support network around you, and it showed how important it is to face your problems and not ignore them, which can then have negative consequences down the line. There were little bits of the book that I didn't like, but overall it was a good book and I really enjoyed it, apart from when it was making me sad. But even then, it was more cathartic rather than just being sad. After that, I read another historical non-fiction. This was How to Kill a Witch by Zoe Venditozzi and Claire Mitchell. This book looked at the witch hunts, especially in Scotland, although it also looked at them in other places as well. It looked at how witches were identified, accused, trialled, and executed. And despite being interested in this time of history, I actually didn't enjoy this book. I found it hard to connect to this book and rated it 2 stars. Although there was a lot of interesting information in it, I found so often that I'd tune out of what I was reading. I'd have to reread bits, and I just wasn't interested in picking up the book. I can't put my finger on why, apart from it did feel like there was an overuse of footnotes. Ordinarily, this doesn't bother me. And I don't know whether it was because I was reading it via ebook rather than physical book. With an ebook, you've got to click on the footnote to bring it up, whereas with a physical book, you just glance down and there's the information. So I don't know if it was to do with that. I don't know if it was just not written in a way that works for me. I just didn't like it. To leave this wrap up on a more positive note, the last book I read was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book I gave 5 stars. It's a book that I'd been putting off for ages because I read Circe and absolutely adored it. So I was a bit nervous about reading this book in case it didn't live up to those high expectations. I didn't enjoy it as much as Circe, but I still really enjoyed it. The Song of Achilles is a retelling of the Iliad told from a perspective of Patroclus. It shows Patroclus growing up, forming a romantic relationship with Achilles, who is the best of the Greeks, and shows the events leading up to the Trojan War and the Trojan War itself. I love Madeline Miller's writing style. I find that I'm fully absorbed in it and start to lose track of time. It didn't take me long to read this book, and I think part of that is because all distractions faded and I was focused purely on the book. The writing is lyrical and it's very much character driven. She takes the time for you to get to know the characters, and although the plots are there, the plot moves more slowly to give you a chance to get to know them. It does mean that plot progression is slow, but in my opinion it's worth it because it makes you feel more deeply for the characters, leading you to care about what happens to them. The end of the book left me wanting more of her writing. It's a shame that she only has 2 full-length novels and a novella out, although there is another novella coming out later this year. I'm definitely hoping to read both novellas at some point. and I hope to see more from this author in the future as well. So that is everything that I read in March. It was a mixed month with 2 stars and 5 stars. I'm just glad there were no 1 stars. I don't tend to give 1 star often, but it does sometimes happen. So what about everyone else? What did you read last month? What 5 stars have you given out this year? Let me know in the comments. And as always, like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more. Now I'll catch you in the next one.